Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very nice game from round 6 of this year's Sinquefield Cup. It is Levon Aronian versus Wesley. And Levon got almost 2 rest days because he finished his game prior to the rest day a little bit early. So he felt well rested, obviously, to attempt something like this. And the game is basically a masterclass in both attack and defense. So Levon Aronian versus Wesley. So let's check it out. And also, just a quick update. I've been using Lotus chess for over a month now, and I've definitely seen a lot of improvement in my, just the overall skill. To the point that I've achieved a rating of 2400 in Bullet on my main account, and then I don't want to mess it up, so I can show it off to my friends at least for a few days before I inevitably lose it, as it usually goes. So I created a new account specifically to play Bullet, and then I got a 2500 rating on that account. So that also made me very happy. Probably gonna open a new one, not to mess this one up, and then maybe I get 2600. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, just saying, if you haven't tried it, first link in the description below, download Lotus Chess. Really will teach you how to play fighting chess, how to think, and it will improve your game immensely. Now, to get back into the game, Levon with white opens with pawn to d4. We have knight to f6 by Wesley, pawn to c4, pawn to e6, and knight to c3. We have pawn to d5, so the queen's gambit declined, and c captures on d5. Now, I already mentioned a couple of videos ago that in lower levels, you will very rarely see this c captures on d5. Maybe at lower levels you will, but then at a medium level you won't, because players prefer to have players with the white pieces prefer to have black's light square bishop sort of having difficulties in development, but at the very top level, you don't mind allowing black developing the light square bishop. So he captures on d5, bishop to g5 by Levon, bishop to e7, we have pawn to e3, and pawn to h6. We have bishop to h4, and bishop to g4, attacking the queen on d1, and knight to f3, nicely defending. We have knight bd7, pawn to h3, and now there are a couple of games where bishop captures on f3 was played. Here we have bishop to f5, and it is now as of move 9 that we have a completely new game. Levon blitzing it out. He's still an hour and 30. Wesley had spent some time as he required 7 minutes to reach this position. But bishop to f5 is the top move recommended by the engine, so this is a very nice game. And Levon strikes with pawn to g4. We have bishop. That's not a bishop. Bishop to h7, bishop to d3, offering a trade, and pawn to c6, not going for the early bishop trade. So Levon says, all right, I don't mind dislodging your knight or rook from the square where they're supposed to be. Knight captures. Of course, you don't capture with the rook. That will lose you castling privileges. Bishop to g3, avoiding the trade of dark square bishops, and knight h back to f6. Wesley, okay, wastes a move, but, not much to worry about here. He does have full control over the e4 square, and it's a question where Levon is castling. So Levon goes knight to d2. Improves his control over the e4 square, bishop to b4, and just pawn to a3, inviting the capture on c3, which Wesley goes for. So captures. Obviously, Levon is no longer castling queenside, and queen to e7, putting pressure on that e3 pawn. We have pawn to a4. If Wesley castles queenside, the pawn is already on a4, ready to march forward. And Wesley says, no, pawn to h5. Let's see what kind of a game you want to have, because, of course, everyone knows Levon wants to create, he wants to attack, he wants to, make stuff happen. But Wesley, he is the former champion of Fischer Random. He doesn't mind, having weird positions, not one bit. Pawn to g5, we have knight to e4, and knight captures on e4. We have queen captures on e4, threatening the rook here. And now Levon just quietly castles. And, okay, the pawn is already on g5. This pawn is on h3, so his king side is a little bit loose. But, obviously, not much to worry about. There's only a queen and knight that Wesley can use to go after the white king. So Wesley says, all right, I'm not in a rush. That c4 square looks excellent. Knight to b6. He's putting the knight to c4, and you can never dislodge this knight from c4. It's a light square. You don't have any minor pieces. You only have a dark square bishop, so that's not going to work. Rook to b1, stopping the knight for the moment, and queen back to e7. So the b7 pawn is protected, and the knight can now move. We have pawn to h4, and Wesley just castles king side. He's not in a rush to go knight c4. We have queen captures on h5, and basically with castles, Wesley is saying, okay, you can have the pawn. I'm not really worried about any king side attack. I'm going to capture on a4, and then I'm just going to defend and push my a pawn to victory. That's Wesley's plan. And Levon says, all right, I like this idea very much. Queen captures on h5, knight captures on a4, and now bishop to e5, saying that, okay, maybe that f pawn is about to start marching forward. Could be very interesting. And Wesley plays knight captures on c3. And this is the first position where Levon really had to do some calculating, and he played pawn to f4. He sacrificed the exchange, but not just the exchange. He actually sacrifices the rook. You could also waste time with rook to b2, and it's even the top move recommended by the engine, but Levon just didn't want to wait for the attack to happen. And it's very, very difficult to calculate this out. You have to allow knight e4, then you kick away the knight, okay, knight to d6, then you go rook to g2. Now you have a rook on the g file, so if it opens up, that will be very good for you. Knight to c4, going after the bishop, pawn to f4, knight captures on e5, d captures with all of these pawns in front of the black king, and now the only move that sort of keeps you in the game is d4. You have to create some disharmony amongst those rooks. We have pawn to g6, f captures, queen captures, and now d captures on e3, pawn to f5, and now rook f7. Only move that will not lose the game for black. We have pawn to e6, rook f6, and queen to g5. And now, okay, you remove the rook from the g file, e2, let's say captures, and the rook to d8. And it's still very, very complicated, very difficult to play. For example, pawn to h5, but black will hold this. But yeah, it's still very, very difficult. And it's interesting that the engine prefers rook to b2 to Levon's move when it doesn't yield more than a draw. But Levon says, nope, just pawn to f4, you can have the rook. And okay, Wesley has to capture it. There's no move that he can make. That's why the knight came to c3. He plays knight captures on b1, and now Levon plays pawn to f5. And it's a really crazy position where Levon is down a full rook, but there is only one move that saves Wesley here. And it's I imagine it's not the first one you think of. Maybe it is, as you guys are very strong. Feel free to pause the video and try to find the only defensive resource for Wesley that holds while I give you a couple of seconds. So the only move that keeps the game going for Wesley is knight to d2, and not for the first thing probably that comes to mind. And just to give you an example, if you play something like, let's say, pawn to a5, just pawn to f6, and you resign. There's nothing you can do here. Just captures and checkmate, or whatever you do, g captures here, hoping for captures and check, but the g pawn will capture, then you give a check and checkmate. If you advance the pawn to g6, then just queen h6 with checkmate. So there is no defending mate on g7. However, with knight to d2, it's a little bit different. Now pawn to f6 still by Levon. Now there's a very hidden resource here that Wesley had planned with knight to d2, and that is queen captures on e5. He sacrifices his queen, but he already got so much material for it that it's not even a sacrifice. We have d captures on e5, and now knight captures on f1. And again, you have a position that I would say it's impossible to calculate even for a classical game. What do you do? Or, in other words, which pawn do you push? So you could push the g pawn, you could push the e pawn, you could play something like f captures on g7, you could play king captures on f1. What do you play here? Well, let's discuss pawn to e6 first, as it's maybe easier to understand. Well, the problem with e6 is that you allow knight g3, and then your queen is attacked, so the queen can no longer remain on this beautiful square. You have to move the queen, then the knight comes to e4, and after, let's say, pawn to e7, rook f8, and queen h5, no problem, just pawn to a5, and now it's even black that's winning this game, because after, let's say, f captures, king captures, queen to h6 check, king g8, and g6, you have this safety move, knight to f6, and the knight is such a great defender of the king. For example, captures, and the knight is controlling all of the squares you can use to even check the black king. So e6 will not work here. How about g6? G6, it's one move from checkmate, so you don't have knight g3. Well, here you have to capture. F captures and g6, queen captures, threatening checkmate, rook f7, you have to defend. Now you have time to get rid of the knight, and after, let's say, rook to e8, you cannot give up the e5 pawn, as those two rooks, accompanied with a couple of passed pawns, will overcome the white queen. So you have to defend the queen, let's say pawn to a5, pawn to h5, pawn to a4, pawn to h6, pawn to a3. Now, you can capture, but it doesn't really do all that much. For example, captures pawn to a2, and you're just not in time to deliver checkmate, as the black pawn queens with check, and you will not be able to get out of checks. So after a3, let's say queen to g6, now comes a2, pawn to h7 check. You have to go to h8, otherwise you just get checkmated. So king to h8, you capture the rook on f7, you allow the pawn to be queened, let's say king to g2. Now g captures on f6, you have to stop checkmate, and queen captures on e8. You grab the other rook as well, and after a couple of captures, queen f7 check, king h6, and queen captures, you have this position where black is up a pawn, and white is not in a position to deliver checkmate. So it would be a draw. So that's why after knight captures on f1, you cannot push. You could capture on f1, but still, you're still left with the decision which pawn to push, and none of it works. So Levon played f captures on g7, and there's only one move that holds, but of course this is the first one you think of. King captures on g7, queen to h6 with check, king to g8, and now pawn to g6, again threatening checkmate. But Wesley has a very nice captures on g6. We have queen captures, king to h8, check, king to g8, and now you could go for a repetition. You could consider pawn to e6. It does look somewhat threatening, but even just a nice knight captures on e3, and you don't really care. Captures rook a to e8, and there's no way for white to deliver checkmate. If anything, if you're not careful, black will win this game. So Levon says, all right, I've tried, you defended well. That's all there is to it. Queen to g6, king to h8, queen to h6 with check, king to g8, queen to g6 check, and he was in this position on move 36 that the game was proclaimed a draw due to a threefold repetition. So yeah, very nicely played by both of them. Levon obviously felt very inspired after those two rest days. He played a very nice game, but Wesley defended well, and he even played this, like I said here, the only move that holds this wonderful knight to d2 move. He spent like a couple of minutes, maybe 4 minutes, deciding on it, and I mean it's the only way to defend. You give up the queen, you capture the rook, and that's it. And the other games, interestingly, although one wouldn't think it, ended in a draw as well. So all of the games of round 5 ended in a draw. All of the games of round 6 ended in a draw. So we have the exact same standings that we had after round 4 was played, and that is that Fabiano Caruana is leading the tournament with 4 points. Followed by shared second with Levon and Pragnananda with 3 points. Wesley MVL, Sam Sevian, Alireza Firuja, and Gukesh Domaraju. Yang Shitov Duda with 2.5, and in last place, Nodirbek Abdusatorov, who is not having the best tournament, still without a win. Yesterday, he was this close to losing to MVL, and everyone thought MVL would just win it, and then, miraculously, Nodirbek saved the game, and he avoided losing yet another game because he had the white pieces. It would be just a disaster for him. So, yeah, good stuff by Nodirbek, but yeah, definitely not his tournament. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Beautiful chess from Levon, as we're used to. So always happy to show his game. But Wesley gave his part definitely, going for it, allowing it, and then just defending against a possible brilliancy. I would like to thank Derek King, Hernan Escalante Jr., Robert Kiefer, Edmund Freeman, and Stephen Wentworth for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. And like I said, first link in the description below. Download Lotus Chess and start improving right now. See you soon.